I need you to understand something before I tell you the story. What happened in Millbrook Hollow in 1861 wasn't just strange. It was wrong in ways that defy everything we understand about nature, about God, about the very fabric of reality itself. I've spent 40 years trying to forget what I witnessed there, but some horrors burrow so deep into your soul that they become part of you, like a parasite that feeds on your sanity. My name is Dr. Edmund Harwick, and in the autumn of 1861, I was a young physician, fresh from my studies in Boston. The war had just begun, and while my colleagues rushed to join the medical corps, I received a peculiar telegram from a small mining town in the Pennsylvania mountains. The message was brief but urgent. Doctor needed immediately. Unusual medical situation. Triple standard rate. Come at once. Mayor Josiah Crane, Millbrook Hollow. The journey took 3 days. As my carriage climbed higher into the mountains, the trees grew denser, their branches forming a canopy so thick that noon felt like twilight. The driver, a weathered man named Collins, grew increasingly agitated as we approached our destination. "Ain't natural, that place," he muttered, spitting tobacco juice into the undergrowth. "Been taking folks up there for near 20 years, and something changed these past months. The birds don't sing no more. Animals avoid it. Even the wind sounds different." I dismissed his concerns as rural superstition, but when we crested the final ridge and I saw Millbrook Hollow nestled in the valley below, a chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the mountain air. The town looked wrong somehow, not abandoned, but lifeless, like a perfectly preserved corpse. The streets were empty when we arrived. Windows were shuttered despite the afternoon hour. The only movement came from curtains twitching as unseen eyes tracked our progress down Main Street. Collins refused to stay, practically throwing my bags onto the muddy ground before fleeing back the way we'd come. Mayor Crane met me at the town hall, a gaunt man with hollow cheeks and eyes that never quite focused on my face. His handshake was cold and damp, like grasping a dead fish. "Thank God you've come, Dr. Harwick," he whispered, though we were alone in his office. "We've had a situation. 3 situations, actually. The Blackthorn brothers." The name meant nothing to me then. Crane poured himself whiskey with trembling hands, downing it in one swallow before continuing. "Elias, Marcus, and Samuel Blackthorn came to town 5 years ago, bought the old Hartley estate up on Crow's Ridge. They keep to themselves mostly, but they're wealthy, made their fortune in shipping, or so they claim. Each brother married a local girl this past year. Different women, you understand. Sarah Mills, Rebecca Palmer, and young Mary Dawson." He paused, pouring another drink. This time he offered me one. I accepted. The women fell pregnant almost immediately after their weddings. Nothing unusual there, except... His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Doctor, all 3 women gave birth on the same night 2 weeks ago. During the eclipse." I remembered the eclipse. Even in Boston, people had called it unnatural, lasting far longer than the astronomers predicted, with the corona burning and sickly green color that hurt to look at directly. "Multiple births on the same night isn't that unusual," I began, but Crane cut me off with a violent shake of his head. "You don't understand. It's not that they gave birth at the same time. It's what they gave birth to." He stood abruptly, walking to the window. "The babies, doctor, they're identical. Not just similar. Identical. Same birthmarks, same weight, same cry. And the women. What about the women? They won't speak of it. Haven't said a word since the births. They just sit in their beds holding those children and staring at nothing. Their families are terrified. The midwife who delivered them, old Hannah, she left town the very next day, packed everything she owned and fled. But before she left, she came to me, grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises, and said, 'Those ain't 3 babies, Mayor. That's 1 child wearing 3 bodies.'" The whiskey turned to acid in my stomach. I wanted to laugh, to dismiss this as hysteria, but something in Crane's eyes stopped me. This wasn't madness, it was terror. "I need you to examine them," Crane continued. "The women, the children. Find some medical explanation, please, before the whole town tears itself apart with fear." That night, I took a room at the town's only inn. The proprietor, a stout woman named Mrs. Garrett, served me dinner in complete silence. When I tried to make conversation about the Blackthorn brothers, she literally fled the room. I ate alone, listening to the unnatural quiet that seemed to press against the windows like a living thing. Unable to sleep, I stood at my window, looking up at Crow's Ridge where the Hartley estate squatted against the night sky. 3 lights burned in 3 different windows, and I could have sworn they pulsed in perfect unison, like a heartbeat made of flame. Tomorrow I would meet the Blackthorn brothers and their wives. Tomorrow I would see the children. I should have left that night. God help me, I should have run. The next morning arrived shrouded in fog so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. Mayor Crane had arranged for a carriage to take me up to the Hartley estate, but no driver would accept the job. In the end, Crane himself drove me, his knuckles white as he gripped the reins. The road to Crow's Ridge wound through dead forest, and I do mean dead. Every tree was leafless and black, as if they'd been burned while still standing. Yet they weren't charred. The wood was smooth and cold to the touch when I pressed my palm against one twisted trunk. Crane flinched when he saw me do it. "They turned that way the day the brothers arrived," he said. "5 years ago. Nothing grows on Crow's Ridge anymore. Nothing except what the brothers plant in their greenhouse." The estate itself was a monument to architectural madness. The original Hartley mansion had been a modest Georgian affair, but the Blackthorn brothers had added wings and towers that defied conventional design. Corridors that seemed to lead nowhere, windows that faced other windows, doors that opened onto brick walls. It was as if 3 different architects had built additions without ever consulting each other or acknowledging the existence of the other's work. Elias Blackthorn answered the door himself. The eldest of the 3 brothers, he was tall and pale, with black hair slicked back from a pronounced widow's peak. His eyes were gray, but not a normal gray. They were the color of tarnished silver, and they seemed to reflect light in ways that made my head ache. "Dr. Harwick," he said, though I hadn't introduced myself. "We've been expecting you. Please come in. My brothers are waiting in the study." The interior was worse than the exterior. The walls were covered in a dark green wallpaper that seemed to writhe in my peripheral vision. Portraits hung at odd angles, all depicting the same subject from different perspectives. A woman with features that seemed to shift and change the longer I looked at her. The air smelled of copper and fermenting fruit. Marcus and Samuel Blackthorn were waiting in a study lined with books written in languages I didn't recognize. They were clearly brothers, the same sharp features, the same unsettling eyes. But where Elias was cold and controlled, Marcus had a manic energy that made him pace constantly, and Samuel sat so still he might have been carved from wax. "You've come about the children," Samuel said. "It wasn't a question. Mayor Crane asked me to examine your wives and newborns," I replied, trying to maintain professional composure despite the wrongness that seemed to emanate from the very walls. "It's standard practice to—" "Standard?" Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Nothing here is standard, Doctor. Haven't you noticed? This house, this town. Us, we exist outside the standard." Elias silenced him with a look that made my blood run cold. "You may examine them," Elias said. "But understand this, our wives are delicate. The birthing was difficult. They need rest and quiet. You will not upset them." He led me up a staircase that seemed to climb higher than the house should allow. We passed door after door, all closed, all identical. From behind some came sounds I couldn't identify, whispers that weren't quite human, scratching that wasn't quite animal. We reached a hallway with 3 doors, each marked with a brass nameplate. "Sarah, Rebecca, Mary." "Sarah is my wife," Elias said. "You'll examine her first." The room was dark, curtains drawn against the wan daylight. Sarah Blackthorn lay in bed, propped against pillows, holding a bundle of white cloth. She had been pretty once, I could tell, but now her face was drawn and hollow, her eyes staring at nothing. She didn't acknowledge our presence. "Sarah," Elias said softly, "the doctor needs to see the child." Mechanically, like a doll operated by hidden strings, Sarah held out the bundle. I took it carefully, pulling back the cloth to reveal, "I need you to understand, I had delivered dozens of babies during my training. I knew what newborns looked like, how they moved, how they sounded. This child was wrong. Not deformed, not sick, just wrong. Its eyes were open, staring at me with an intelligence no 2-week-old infant should possess. Its skin was perfect, too perfect, like porcelain. And when it smiled, God help me, it smiled, I saw teeth. Tiny, perfect, sharp teeth that no newborn should have. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the birthmark on its left temple. A mark shaped like a 7-pointed star, dark purple against that alabaster skin. Healthy, isn't he? Elias asked, and there was something hungry in his voice. I managed to nod, handing the child back to its mother. Sarah took it with the same mechanical movements, pressing it to her breast. The child latched on, and I heard a sound that made my stomach turn. Not suckling, but something else. Something that reminded me of the sound a leech makes when it feeds. Now Marcus's wife, Elias said. Rebecca Blackthorn's room was identical to Sarah's. So was her condition, the same vacant stare, the same mechanical movements. And when she presented her child, it was the same baby. Not similar. Not a twin. The same child, same weight, same eyes, same unnatural smile, same 7-pointed birthmark in exactly the same place. My hands shook as I examined it. Every measurement matched exactly. Every detail was identical. It was impossible, but there it was, staring at me with those knowing eyes. Mary Blackthorn's room confirmed what my rational mind refused to accept. The third child was identical to the first two in every way. 3 different mothers had somehow given birth to the same child. How? I whispered, standing in the hallway after the examinations. This is impossible. The 3 brothers stood before me, their silver eyes gleaming in the dim light. Impossible? Samuel asked. Doctor, you're thinking in terms of your limited medical training. There are older sciences, older truths. What we've achieved here, Marcus added, his grin too wide, is the culmination of centuries of preparation. You see, Doctor, Elias said, moving closer, close enough that I could smell his breath. It reeked of spoiled milk and sulfur. We are not 3 brothers. We are one being divided long ago by necessity. And now, through these vessels, through these women, we have created our heir. 1 soul in 3 bodies, just as we are 3 bodies sharing 1 soul. I ran. God forgive me. I pushed past them and ran, taking the stairs 3 at a time, bursting out of that nightmare house into the gray morning. I could hear them laughing behind me, or was it just one voice, echoing from 3 throats? I should have left Millbrook Hollow that very day. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to return to Boston and forget this cursed place existed. But I was young, arrogant, and fatally curious. The scientific part of my mind refused to accept what I had witnessed. There had to be a rational explanation, fraud, perhaps, or some form of collective delusion. I spent the next 3 days investigating, though the townspeople were reluctant to speak with me. What I learned came in fragments, whispered conversations that ended when others approached, documents hidden in the town hall's archives that Crane pretended not to notice when I borrowed them. The Hartley estate had a dark history long before the Blackthorn brothers arrived. Built in 1793 by Jeremiah Hartley, a merchant who'd made his fortune in the Indies trade, it had been the site of numerous tragedies. Hartley's wife had died in childbirth, along with triplets who, according to the midwife's journal I found, bore the devil's mark upon them and breathed not with their own breath but with one shared between them. The mansion had stood empty for 30 years after the last Hartley heir died in 1831. Died in a fire that consumed only his bedroom, leaving the rest of the house untouched. The authorities found his body twisted into an impossible position, as if he had been trying to divide himself in 3. But the brothers themselves were the real mystery. I could find no record of them before their arrival in Millbrook Hollow. They claimed to be from Salem, but my telegrams to colleagues there turned up nothing. No Blackthorn Shipping Company existed in any port registry I could access. The brothers had appeared from nowhere, paid for the estate in gold coins that the bank reported were of unusual composition, containing metals that could not be identified. On my 4th night in town, I was approached by someone unexpected, old Hannah, the midwife who had supposedly fled after delivering the 3 identical children. I found her waiting in my room at the inn, sitting in darkness. "I knew you wouldn't leave," she said, her voice cracked with age and fear. "They never do, the curious ones. They stay until they understand, and by then it's too late." She lit a candle, and I saw that her hair, black when she delivered the babies 2 weeks ago, had turned completely white. "You want to know the truth about them brothers?" she asked. "Then you need to know about the books they brought. Books written in languages that hurt to read, with covers made of skin that ain't from any animal I know. I seen one once, when I was cleaning the estate before the wives moved in. Just a glimpse, but it was enough." She pulled a piece of paper from her pocket, unfolding it with trembling hands. On it was drawn a symbol, the same 7-pointed star I'd seen on the baby's temples. "This is the mark of division," she whispered. "It's from the old religions, the ones that existed before Christ, before Moses, before the flood. The ones that knew how to split a soul and scatter it across multiple bodies, how to gather power from the spaces between life and death." "That's superstition," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Hannah laughed bitterly. "Superstition? Boy, I delivered those babies. You want to know what really happened that night? All 3 women went into labor at exactly the same moment. I was running between the 3 rooms, and each time I delivered what I thought was a separate child. But when I cleaned the blood from my hands between deliveries, it didn't wash off. It crawled back onto my skin and disappeared." She stood, moving toward the door. "The wives ain't really wives, doctor. They're incubators. Those things that look like babies ain't children. They're something else, something growing, something that needed 3 wombs to gestate properly. And when they're done growing..." What happens when they're done growing?" But Hannah was already gone, vanishing into the night. I found out later that her body was discovered the next morning at the bottom of Miller's Gorge, though no one could explain how she'd gotten there or why her corpse appeared to have been divided into 3 equal parts. That night, I dreamed of the Blackthorn brothers, except in my dream, they moved in perfect synchronization, like marionettes controlled by a single puppeteer. They stood over a diagram drawn in blood on the floor of their estate. 3 circles intersecting to form a single center, and in that center writhed something that my mind refused to fully perceive. I woke to find the diagram from my dream drawn in condensation on my window. The next morning, Mayor Crane came to see me. He was even more haggard than before, and his hands shook constantly now. "There's been developments," he said. "The wives, they're changing." He led me back to the estate, though every step felt like walking toward my own doom. This time, all 3 brothers met us at the door, moving in that same unsettling unison I dreamed about. "The good doctor returns," they said. All 3 of them said it, at exactly the same time, their voices harmonizing in a way that made my teeth ache. The wives had indeed changed. Sarah, Rebecca, and Mary were no longer in their separate rooms. We found them in the greenhouse at the center of the house, sitting in a triangle formation, each holding their identical child. Their eyes had taken on the same silver sheen as their husbands, and when they looked at me, they did so in perfect synchronization. But it was what grew in the greenhouse that made me understand the true horror of what was happening in Millbrook Hollow. The plants weren't really plants at all, they were flesh growing in impossible configurations. Organs that belonged to no known anatomy pulsed within translucent pods. Vines that bled when touched spelled out words in languages that predated human speech. And at the center of it all grew something that might once have been a tree, but was now a twisted amalgamation of wood and bone and something else. Something that shouldn't exist in our reality. On its trunk was carved the same 7-pointed star, and from its branches hung 3 cocoons, each one the size of a man. "Beautiful, isn't it?" the brothers asked in their Trinity voice. "It took us so long to find the right place, the right time, the right vessels. The stars had to align just so. The eclipse was the catalyst, but the real work began years ago." "What are you?" I managed to ask. They smiled, all 3 of them, the same smile at the same moment. "We are what comes next," they said. "When humanity has served its purpose, When the barriers between dimensions wear thin, we will be ready. These children are not our offspring. They are us, refined, evolved, prepared for what's coming. And these, they gestured to the cocoons. These are for the wives. They've served their purpose as vessels. Now they'll serve a new one. As they spoke, the cocoons began to pulse and writhe. Something was growing inside them, something that would soon emerge. I realized then that I wasn't meant to cure anything. I wasn't brought here to help. I was brought here to witness, to document, to carry the knowledge of what was happening back to the world. Or perhaps, I thought with growing horror as I felt a strange tingling in my own flesh, I was brought here for an entirely different purpose altogether. That night, I attempted to leave Millbrook Hollow. I packed my bags in secret, slipped out of the inn before dawn, and made my way to the edge of town on foot. But the road that had brought me here was gone. Not blocked or destroyed, gone, as if it had never existed. Where the path should have been, I found only dense forest, the trees grown so close together that not even a child could squeeze between them. I tried another route, then another. Each time, the same result. The town was sealed, cut off from the outside world by a barrier of impossibly dense vegetation. When I examined the trees closely, I found they were the same as those on Crow's Ridge. Black, smooth, and wrong. But these were fresh, still growing. I watched in horror as new branches sprouted before my eyes, twisting and reaching like grasping fingers. Panic drove me back to town, where I found the streets eerily empty. The few people I encountered moved with a strange, dreamlike quality, their eyes unfocused, their movements slightly out of sync with reality. When I tried to speak with them, they looked through me as if I weren't there. Mayor Crane was in his office, but he was no longer the man I'd met just days ago. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and when he turned to face me, I saw that his eyes were beginning to show flecks of silver. "It's spreading," he said, his voice oddly calm. "The change. It started with the wives, but now it's in the air, in the water, in the very ground beneath our feet. We're all becoming something else, Doctor. Something better, they say. We have to stop this?" I insisted, but Crane just smiled. A smile that reminded me too much of the Blackthorn brothers. "Stop it? Doctor, this has been planned for centuries. We're not victims here. We're participants in something glorious. The town, the people, we were chosen, prepared. Why do you think Millbrook Hollow exists at all? It was built for this purpose, on this spot, where the walls between worlds are thinnest." That night, unable to sleep, I returned to the Hartley estate. I don't know what drew me there. Perhaps the same morbid curiosity that had kept me in town when I should have fled. The house was dark except for a light in the greenhouse, visible through the glass ceiling that formed the center of the strange architectural mass. I entered through an unlocked door, moving through corridors that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. The portraits on the walls had changed too. They no longer showed the mysterious woman but instead depicted the three brothers in various historical periods, wearing different faces but always with those same silver eyes. The greenhouse was transformed. The flesh plants had grown exponentially, covering every surface with pulsing organic matter. The air was thick with spores that glowed faintly in the darkness, and breathing them in made my thoughts feel loose and disconnected. The three cocoons had grown larger, and now I could see shadows moving within them, human-shaped but wrong, too many limbs or not enough, constantly shifting and reforming. The wives sat beneath them, still holding their identical children, but they were no longer entirely human. Their skin had become translucent, showing veins that pulsed with black fluid. Their hair had fallen out, replaced by thin tendrils that moved independently, tasting the air. But it was the children that had changed the most. They had aged impossibly fast, no longer infants but toddlers, all three standing in the center of the triangle formed by their mothers. They were naked, and their skin bore patterns that hurt to look at, geometric designs that seemed to exist in more dimensions than three. When they turned to look at me, moving in perfect unison, I saw that their eyes were no longer silver but black. Not the black of pupils but the black of void, of spaces between stars. "Dr. Harwick," they said. their voices layered and harmonious despite coming from such small throats. "We've been waiting for you." The brothers emerged from the shadows, but they were no longer maintaining separate forms. They flickered and merged and separated like flames, sometimes one being, sometimes three, sometimes something in between. "You understand now," they said. "This is evolution, but not as your Darwin imagined. This is conscious transformation, directed metamorphosis. We are becoming what humanity was always meant to become, unified, connected, free from the prison of individual flesh. You're destroying these people," I protested, though my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. "Destroying?" The child things laughed, a sound like breaking bells. "We're completing them. Every human carries within them the fragments of something greater, scattered and diluted through generations of breeding and division. We're simply gathering those fragments, reconstituting the whole." As they spoke, I noticed something happening to my own hands. The skin was becoming transparent, and I could see my veins darkening, the blood within them thickening with something that wasn't quite blood anymore. "You feel it, don't you?" the brothers asked. "You've been breathing our air, drinking our water, walking on our soil. The change is already in you, Doctor. Fighting it only makes the transformation more painful." I wanted to deny it, but I could feel the truth in my bones. My thoughts were becoming strange, fragmented. I kept having memories that weren't mine, memories of places I'd never been, in times before I was born. I saw myself in Salem during the witch trials, but I was both accuser and accused. I saw myself on a ship crossing dark waters, carrying cargo that writhed and whispered in the hold. I saw myself building Millbrook Hollow, laying foundations and patterns that would only make sense centuries later. "These aren't your memories," the child things explained. "They're the memories of the whole, the collective consciousness you're joining. Every person who's ever lived in Millbrook Hollow, every soul that's been prepared for this moment. They're all part of the pattern now." The cocoons began to split open, releasing a fluid that smelled of copper and ozone. The things that emerged were no longer the wives I had examined days ago. They were something new, something that shouldn't exist, beings of constantly shifting flesh and shadow, with too many eyes and mouths that opened in places mouths shouldn't be. Yet somehow they were beautiful in their wrongness, like seeing the true form of something that had always been disguised as human. "Join us," they sang, their voices a harmony that made reality ripple. "Stop resisting. Stop pretending to be singular when you were always meant to be plural." I ran again, but this time I wasn't trying to escape the town. I was trying to escape myself, the thing I was becoming. But everywhere I went in that nightmare house, I saw reflections of the transformation. In mirrors, I saw myself multiplying, dividing, becoming 2, then 3, then more. In windows, I saw my face aging and growing younger simultaneously. In puddles of that strange fluid leaking from the cocoons, I saw myself as I truly was, not one consciousness trapped in one body, but a fragment of something vast and terrible, something that had been waiting eons to reunite. The children followed me, walking in perfect synchronization, their footsteps echoing in patterns that spelled out words in languages that predated speech. "You're the final piece," they said. "The observer, the recorder, the one who bridges the gap between what was and what will be. You were chosen not to stop this but to complete it. Your presence here makes it real, makes it permanent. By witnessing, you give it power. By understanding, you give it form." I found myself in a room I hadn't seen before, circular and windowless, with walls covered in the same 7-pointed star repeated endlessly. In the center was a chair, and somehow I knew it was meant for me. Had always been meant for me. "Sit," the voices said. Not just the brothers and the children and the transformed wives, but the house itself, the town, the very air. "Sit and become what you were always meant to be." I wish I could say I resisted. I wish I could say I fought until the end. But the truth is, as my body began to change, as my consciousness began to expand and fragment and merge with the others, I felt something I hadn't expected. I felt like I was coming home. As I sat in that chair, my transformation accelerating, I experienced something beyond normal human perception. My consciousness fragmented into 1,000 pieces, each one experiencing a different moment in time simultaneously. I was everyone who had ever lived in Millbrook Hollow, everyone who had ever been touched by the Blackthorn influence, and through their memories, I finally understood the true scope of what was happening. The Blackthorn brothers were not the originators of this horror. They were merely its latest incarnation. The pattern had been repeating for millennia, across different cultures and continents. Always three vessels, always a convergence, always a town or village that would serve as the birthplace for something that shouldn't exist in our reality. I saw ancient Babylon, where three priests of a forgotten god conducted rituals that split their souls and merged them with something from beyond the stars. I saw medieval France, where three nobles in a remote castle birthed abominations that wore the faces of children. I saw colonial New England, where three women hanged as witches actually were witches, but not the kind the prosecutors imagined. They were preparing the ground for what would come centuries later. Millbrook Hollow itself was built on a convergence point, a place where the barriers between dimensions were naturally thin. The town's founding fathers knew this. They were part of a secret society that had been preparing for this moment for generations, carefully breeding the population to produce the perfect vessels, the ideal incubators for the transformation. Every family in Millbrook Hollow had been selected, every marriage arranged, every birth planned. The three women who married the Blackthorn brothers, Sarah, Rebecca, and Mary, were the culmination of 2 centuries of careful genetic manipulation. Their bloodlines traced back to those original practitioners in Babylon, France, and New England. But the most horrifying revelation was this: I, too, had been planned. My medical training, my presence here at this exact moment, even my skepticism, all of it was part of the design. I was to be the chronicler, the one who would document the transformation and, through that documentation, make it real and irreversible. You see, these beings, for I can no longer call them the Blackthorn brothers, they exist partially in our reality and partially in another. They need an anchor, a consciousness that observes and records their existence, giving them substance and form in our world. Every iteration throughout history had its chronicler, someone who would witness and write down what occurred, cementing it in reality. As this knowledge flooded through me, I felt my body continuing to change. My skin became like liquid, flowing and reshaping itself. I could feel myself dividing, becoming multiple, yet remaining one. The chair I sat in wasn't just furniture. It was a conduit, designed to channel the transformation and broadcast it throughout the town. Through my expanded consciousness, I could sense every person in Millbrook Hollow undergoing the same change. The baker, the blacksmith, the schoolteacher. All of them were transforming, their individual identities dissolving into a collective consciousness. But unlike my transformation, which was meant to preserve my ability to observe and record, theirs was complete dissolution. They were becoming the raw material for something else, something that would use their flesh and memories as building blocks. The 3 identical children were the key. They were not children at all but chrysalises, temporary forms that would eventually merge into a single being. A being that would exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions, able to traverse the barriers between worlds at will. The Blackthorn brothers were merely preparing the way, clearing the path for this entity's arrival. Through the walls of the house, I could sense the forest around Millbrook Hollow continuing to grow, sealing us off from the outside world. But it wasn't keeping us in, it was keeping the rest of the world out, protecting it from what we were becoming. Or perhaps protecting us until the transformation was complete. Days passed, or perhaps minutes, time had lost all meaning. The greenhouse at the center of the house had become a cathedral of flesh and plant matter, pulsing with bioluminescent light. The wives, now fully transformed into things that defied description, tended to their identical children with dozens of arms that sprouted from backs and sides and places that shouldn't have arms. The children themselves were aging rapidly but in reverse, growing larger but becoming more fetal, more primitive, as if returning to some primordial state. Their skin had become transparent, revealing organs that weren't quite organs, structures that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. And through it all, I remained conscious, aware, trapped in my role as witness. The chair had fused with my body, or my body with it. I could no longer tell where I ended and it began. Roots grew from my feet, anchoring me to the floor, while my arms extended into branch-like appendages that scratched symbols and words onto surfaces that materialized around me. Walls of paper, sheets of skin, tablets of bone. I was writing this account even then, though not with hands or pen. The words were emanating from me, impressed into reality itself, ensuring that somewhere, someone would read them and understand what had happened in Millbrook Hollow. The Blackthorn brothers visited me in my chair-prison throne, though they no longer maintained even the pretense of separate bodies. They were a writhing mass of flesh and shadow and something else, something that hurt to perceive directly. Soon, they said with mouths that formed and reformed from their substance. The convergence is almost complete. When the children finish their reverse gestation, when they return to the prime state, the door will open fully. What comes through will remake not just this town but reality itself, spreading outward like a virus of transformation, converting matter and consciousness into something more useful, more unified. Why? I managed to ask, though speaking was agony as my throat had developed additional vocal cords that harmonized against my will. Why do this? Because, they answered, this is how universes evolve. Not through random mutation and selection, but through conscious directed transformation. Your reality is a larval stage, nothing more. We are the metamorphosis. What emerges will be as different from your world as a butterfly is from a caterpillar. And like a caterpillar, your world must dissolve into undifferentiated matter before it can be reformed. I wanted to scream, to rage against this cosmic horror, but part of me, the part that was no longer entirely me, understood. In the grand scale of existence, what was one small town, one species, one reality? We were all temporary arrangements of matter and consciousness, destined to be reorganized into new configurations. The Blackthorn brothers and their kind were simply accelerating a process that would occur naturally over billions of years. But understanding didn't make it less horrifying. As I write these words, carved into reality itself through my transformed being, I can feel the final phase beginning. The children are ready. The town is ready. The door between worlds is cracking open, and through that crack, I can see what waits on the other side. It is beautiful and terrible and utterly alien. It is everything and nothing. It is the end of one story and the beginning of another, written in languages that haven't been invented yet, telling tales of futures that negate the past. The transformation of Millbrook Hollow had reached its crescendo, but I need you to understand something crucial. What happened next wasn't an ending. It was an unraveling, like pulling a loose thread that causes an entire tapestry to come apart, revealing something else beneath that had always been there, waiting. The three children stood in the center of the greenhouse, their bodies now translucent shells containing swirling galaxies of dark matter. They had grown to adult size but maintained fetal positions, floating a few feet off the ground, connected to each other by umbilical cords made of light and shadow. The wives' things circled them, singing in harmonies that made the air itself bleed. Through my expanded consciousness, I witnessed the town's complete transformation. Every building had become organic, walls breathing, windows blinking like eyes. The church's steeple had twisted into a spiral of bone and wood, reaching toward a sky that was no longer blue but a sickly yellow-green, like old bruises. The streets ran with a viscous fluid that wasn't quite water, wasn't quite blood, but something between and beyond both. The townspeople no longer existed as individuals. They had merged into a single, massive organism that sprawled across Millbrook Hollow like a fungus. Their consciousness dissolved into a collective mind that thought thoughts too large for any single brain to contain. Sometimes I could see faces forming in its surface. Mayor Crane, Mrs. Garrett from the inn, the unnamed citizens I had passed on the streets, but they would sink back into the mass before they could fully materialize. But it was what I saw through the crack between worlds that truly broke what remained of my human sanity. The other side wasn't another dimension or another planet. It was the truth behind our reality, the scaffolding upon which our universe was built. And that scaffolding was alive, conscious, and it had been waiting for this moment since before time began. Imagine reality as a painting, and we had always assumed we were the subjects of that painting. But we weren't. We were the paint itself, and something else was the artist. The Blackthorn brothers, the children, the transformation, they were just the brush beginning its work, preparing to repaint existence into something new. Through that crack, I saw countless other realities, each one at different stages of the same transformation. Some had resisted longer than others. In one, I glimpsed a world of crystalline beings who had fought the change for millennia before succumbing. In another, sentient machines had tried to logic their way out of transformation, only to find that logic itself was part of the pattern. And in all of them, in every single reality I could perceive, there were chroniclers like me, beings trapped between states, forced to observe and record, to give substance to the horror through witnessing. The brothers' thing approached my chair-throne prison, its mass of flesh and impossibility towering over me. "Do you see now?" it asked with 1,000 mouths. "This isn't destruction. It's art. Every reality is a canvas, and periodically, the artist must paint something new. We are the paint being mixed, prepared for application." "But why keep me conscious?" I asked, though asking took tremendous effort as my mouth had begun to split into multiple speaking organs. "Why make me watch?" "Because," it replied, "art without an audience is just motion. Horror without a witness is just change. You give this meaning, Doctor. Your observation, your revulsion, your documentation. It all feeds into the transformation, gives it depth and texture. The artist needs critics, even unwilling ones." The children began to merge. Not physically, their bodies remained separate, but their essences started to flow together, creating a triangle of energy between them. The space within that triangle started to crack like glass, revealing glimpses of something so vast and incomprehensible that my transformed consciousness could only process fragments of it. I saw cities made of living mathematics, where equations built themselves into structures that defied geometry. I saw forests of nerve endings that transmitted thoughts between worlds. I saw oceans of consciousness where individual identity was considered a disease to be cured. And overseeing it all, I saw the artist, though saw isn't the right word. I perceived it, felt its attention like the weight of mountains, experienced its creativity like drowning in an ocean of possibilities. It wasn't malevolent or benevolent. It simply was, and its nature was to create, destroy, and recreate using realities as its medium. The children completed their merger, and the triangle between them became a door, not to another place, but to another state of being. Through it poured something that wasn't matter or energy, but the potential for both. The raw stuff of creation before it decided what to become. This substance, for lack of a better word, began to consume Millbrook Hollow, but consumption isn't accurate either. It was more like translation, converting everything it touched from one language of existence to another. Buildings became theorems. People became stories. The ground became a hypothesis about solidity. I felt it reaching for me, ready to translate my chronically bound existence into something else. But the chair throne held me in place, kept me in my role as witness. I would not be translated. I would remain partially untranslated, a footnote in reality's new language, forever observing the new world being written over the old. But then something unexpected happened. Something that wasn't part of the pattern, wasn't part of the plan. One of the children, I couldn't tell which one, as they had become indistinguishable, screamed, not with a human voice, but with the sound of reality tearing. The triangular door flickered, wavered, and for a moment, I saw fear in the mass that had been the Blackthorn brothers. "No," it said with all its mouths. "This isn't right. The pattern is breaking." Through my connection to the collective consciousness, I felt what was happening. One of the original women, I think it was Mary, young Mary Dawson, who had been barely 18 when she married Samuel, had somehow retained a fragment of her individual identity within the collective. Just a spark, a tiny ember of self that had survived the transformation. And that ember was fighting back. Not with strength or power, she had neither, but with a single, pure emotion that cut through the cosmic horror like a blade. Love. Not for the thing she had birthed, but for the child she had thought she was carrying, the normal human baby she had dreamed of before the truth was revealed. That love, that purely human emotion, was anathema to the transformation. It was too small, too specific, too individual to be incorporated into the grand design. It was like finding a spelling error in the fundamental code of reality, tiny, but capable of crashing the entire system. The door began to close, the translation process reversing. The artist's attention wavered, turned elsewhere, perhaps to realities where the transformation was proceeding smoothly. The Blackthorn mass writhed in frustration and pain, its carefully orchestrated plan unraveling because of one young woman's love for a child that never truly existed. "Fix it!" the mass screamed at me. "You're the chronicler. Write it differently. Make it work." But I couldn't. My role was to observe and record, not to change. I could only watch as Mary's spark of humanity spread like an infection through the collective, awakening other dormant identities. Sarah remembered her father's laugh. Rebecca recalled the taste of apple pie at the harvest festival. One by one, tiny human memories and emotions began to corrupt the grand transformation. The children started to separate, their merger failing. The door slammed shut with a sound like worlds colliding. The translation process didn't just stop. It shattered, sending shockwaves through multiple dimensions. And in that moment of shattering, I saw something that gave me hope and horror in equal measure. This had happened before. Many times. The pattern had been attempted throughout history, across countless realities, and sometimes, just sometimes, it failed. Failed because of love or hope or spite, or any of 1,000 small human emotions that refused to be translated into cosmic truth. But each failure was temporary. The artist was patient. It would try again, in another place, another time, with other vessels. The pattern would repeat until it succeeded, until it found a reality where no spark of individuality survived to corrupt the transformation. As Millbrook Hollow began to collapse, not physically, but existentially, its altered state unable to maintain itself without the completed pattern, I remained in my chair, watching, recording, unable to die or fully live. I don't know how long I remained in that chair after the transformation failed. Time had become meaningless, a suggestion rather than a law. Millbrook Hollow existed in a state of aftermath, neither fully transformed nor fully returned to normal. It had become a scar on reality, a place where the rules were negotiable and nothing was quite what it seemed. The Blackthorn brothers had disappeared, not fled, but ceased. Without the completed pattern to sustain them, they had simply stopped existing, leaving only shadows burned into the walls of the estate, 3 human-shaped absences that hurt to look at directly. The children had reverted to something like their infant forms, but wrong, too old in their eyes, too knowing in their cries. The wives lay comatose, their bodies mostly human again but bearing traces of the transformation that would never fully fade. The townspeople who had merged into that collective mass had separated, but imperfectly. Sometimes you might see someone walking down the street and notice they had too many shadows, or their reflection in windows showed multiple faces, or they would speak in harmonies when they thought no one was listening. They avoided each other's eyes, afraid of what they might recognize there. Fragments of consciousness that weren't their own, memories of being part of something larger and terrible. The forest barrier around the town had solidified into something like black glass, trapping us all inside. No one could leave, but more disturbing, no one from outside seemed to remember Millbrook Hollow existed. We had become a pocket outside normal space and time, a footnote that reality had forgotten to erase. I remained in the chair for weeks, months, perhaps years, forcibly observing the slow decay of what had almost been born. My body had partially fused with the structure of the house itself. I could feel every footstep on the floors above, every draft through broken windows, every settling of the foundation. The house and I had become one organism, chronicling the aftermath of cosmic failure. It was during this time that I made a terrible discovery. In what had been the greenhouse, now a cavern of crystallized plant flesh and broken dreams, I found documents. Not books exactly, but information encoded in the very structure of the transformed matter. And through my connection to the house, I could read them. They were records of previous attempts, stretching back millions of years. The pattern had been tried on Earth 17 times before. The Blackthorn brothers were just the latest iteration of something that had taken many forms. Plague doctors in medieval Europe who tried to transform London, railroad barons in the American West who had attempted to use the transcontinental railway as a massive ritual circle, Tech entrepreneurs in a future that might still come to pass who would try to upload human consciousness into a collective digital mind that would serve as the seedbed for transformation. Most horrifying was the realization that each failed attempt left echoes, traces of itself in reality. Ghost towns that weren't quite ghost towns. Missing persons who were never quite missing. Urban legends that were memories of transformations that almost were. The world was littered with scars from these failures, places where reality was thin and wrong, where the pattern might try again. And in each case, there had been someone like me, a chronicler trapped between states, doomed to record both the attempt and its failure. I found their words encoded in the crystallized flesh, their observations and horror preserved for future iterations to study and learn from. The pattern was learning, adapting, becoming better at avoiding the small human elements that could cause it to fail. One account, from a Spanish conquistador who had witnessed an attempt in a Mayan city, contained a warning. The failures are not endings but rehearsals. Each time it fails, it learns. Each chronicler's account becomes a lesson for the next attempt. We who record these horrors are not just witnesses but teachers, instructing future iterations how to succeed where past ones failed. I realized then the true horror of my position. My account, these very words, would become part of the instruction manual for the next attempt. Every detail I recorded about how Mary's love had disrupted the pattern would be studied, analyzed, and countered in future iterations. But I couldn't stop writing. The compulsion was built into my transformed nature. I was a recording device made of flesh and consciousness, unable to do anything but observe and document. As years passed, or what felt like years in our broken time, Millbrook Hollow developed its own horrible equilibrium. The survivors learned to live with their fractured existences. They married, had children, though those children were always slightly wrong. Too many fingers, eyes that reflected light like cats, the ability to be in two places at once, and pretended that this was normal. The estate became a place of pilgrimage for those who felt the pull of the pattern. People would arrive from nowhere, literally nowhere, as if reality had generated them spontaneously, drawn to the house and to me. They would stand before my chair throne and confess things that human language shouldn't be able to express. Some would try to complete the pattern, to restart the transformation, but without the proper preparation, without the right vessels, they only managed to transform themselves into abominations that we would have to burn in the town square. The 3 children grew, but not in any way that made sense. Sometimes they were infants, sometimes teenagers, sometimes old men, their ages fluctuating based on who was observing them and from what angle. Their mothers cared for them in their comatose state, feeding them substances that materialized from nowhere, singing lullabies in languages that had been erased from history. And through it all, I watched and wrote, my consciousness expanding to fill every corner of the estate, every twisted inch of Millbrook Hollow. I became the town's memory, its confessor, its historian. I knew every secret, every hidden shame, every moment of transformation and failure. But the worst part was knowing that this was not an ending. The pattern would try again. Maybe not here, maybe not soon, but somewhere, somewhen, 3 vessels would be found, 3 children would be born, and the transformation would begin anew. And perhaps next time, there would be no Mary Dawson with her spark of love. Perhaps next time, the pattern would complete, and reality would be repainted into something unrecognizable. As I write these final words, though nothing here is ever truly final, I can feel something stirring. The forest barrier has begun to thin in places. Time is starting to flow more normally. The outside world is beginning to remember that Millbrook Hollow exists. Soon, perhaps, someone will find this place. They'll discover the estate with its impossible architecture, the town with its wrong people, and me, still fused to this chair, still writing, still observing. They'll read these words and think them fiction, the ravings of a madman or the creative output of a disturbed mind. But you who read this know the truth. The pattern is real. It has failed before and it will try again. Look for the signs: 3 brothers who aren't quite brothers, 3 women who bear identical children, towns that feel wrong in ways you can't articulate. And if you find them, don't try to stop it through strength or science. Remember Mary Dawson. Remember that sometimes the smallest, most human emotions can disrupt the grandest cosmic horrors. Love, hope, spite, joy, These are the weapons against the pattern. Not because they're powerful, but because they're specific, individual, unable to be translated into the universal language the transformation requires. But also remember this: each failure teaches the pattern how to succeed. Each chronicler's account, including mine, becomes part of its education. So perhaps the greatest service I can provide is to lie, to record false information that will mislead future attempts. But I cannot lie. The chair won't let me. I can only tell the truth of what happened in Millbrook Hollow in 1861, when three brothers who were one being tried to transform reality and failed because a young woman loved a child that never existed. The estate still stands. The town still exists, scarred and wrong but persistent. The three children still age and unage, trapped between states. The mothers still tend to them in their comatose devotion. And I still sit in this chair, merged with the house, observing and recording, waiting for the next attempt, the next failure, or perhaps, eventually, the success that will remake everything. If you find yourself in Millbrook Hollow, and you might, as reality sometimes generates paths to it for those who need to witness, don't look for me. Don't enter the estate. Don't speak to the wrong people who inhabit the town. Just remember that you walk through a scar on reality, a place where the fundamental transformation of existence failed by the narrowest margin. And pray that the next attempt fails too. For I have seen what waits on the other side of successful transformation, and it is neither death nor life but something else entirely. A state of being where individuality is a disease, where consciousness is collective, where the very concept of I ceases to have meaning. The Blackthorn brothers were wrong about one thing. It isn't evolution. It's reduction, simplification, the breaking down of the beautiful complexity of individual existence into something uniform and unified. The artist they spoke of isn't creating. It's erasing, preparing blank canvases by destroying the paintings that already exist. We are those paintings. Each human consciousness is a unique work of art, irreplaceable and irreproducible. The pattern seeks to paint over us, to turn us all into the same shade of cosmic gray. So remember Millbrook Hollow. Remember the Blackthorn brothers. Remember the three children who were one child. Remember Mary Dawson's love. And remember that somewhere, in a chair that has become part of a house, that has become part of a town, that has become part of a scar on reality, Dr. Edmund Harwick still sits, still watches, still writes, bearing witness to the horror that almost was and might yet be. The pattern will try again. Be ready. Be human. Be individual. It's the only defense we have.